The Allen Lund Company is celebrating 48 years in transportation. Stop by and see us at Matt's, booth 18193.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
A situation has come up that has serious potential consequences. Drivers being stranded by their carriers. I'll discuss that and more with Joe Biggs and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Business Services Department. If your truck is going to be parked for a while, you may have wondered about pausing your insurance policy. The folks from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department explain how that works. And finally, Wisconsin lawmakers have taken action to stop nuclear verdicts, and other states are addressing that as well. Scott Thompson discusses that and more with our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. Diesel prices are down for a second straight week on the Energy Information Administration's weekly report. The agency notes that the average for a gallon of diesel fell more than 3.5 cents last week to $4.02. 8 of the 10 regions on the EIA survey recorded price drops, led by the West Coast, less California, where diesel was down 7.5 cents. The only 2 regions that saw prices go the other direction were California and the Rocky Mountains, but the gains were modest at less than a cent each. As for this week, ProMiles.com data shows a decline as well. The Tuesday morning average settled in at the same level as the EIA report at $4.02, down nearly 4 cents compared to last Tuesday. Prices were down in 9 regions, the Rocky Mountains being the only outlier, with a gain of 2 cents. A rise for weekly load posts, but the recent major weather event in Northern California caused a major disruption to freight movement. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford has the details.
The number of weekly load posts on DAT rose 8.9% last week. Robert Rouse says though this number went up, the number of load posts was down 11.3% year over year, with reefer loads driving that decrease, being down 20.3% compared to this time last year.
Last year in March, we saw Northern California get blasted with multiple feet of snow. And this major weather event was a huge disruption to the freight movement in the entire area. Over the weekend, the same region got hit with another nasty storm, bringing massive amounts of snow and wind. And since we saw a similar event last year, we have a pretty good comparison point to understand how it might impact the spot market this year. So first, this weather event was predicted to hit a couple of days ahead of time. This led to a large week-over-week load volume increase in impacted markets like Ontario, California, Los Angeles, Stockton, and San Francisco, all increasing anywhere from 20 to 36% in total load volumes as loads were really cranking to get out of there before the storm got there. Weekly numbers for all West Coast markets rose higher than average, the national average, at about 27% week over week, and that's likely influenced by all those storms.
Rouse says even though loads increased last week, they saw overall rates for both vans and reefers decrease once again. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. Meanwhile, ACT Research may have found a silver lining as we anxiously await a recovery in the freight market, but it is faint. The latest comes via the company's for-hire trucking index. The report has a volume index up 1.7 points in January, while freight demand continued its gradual recovery. ACT says spot rates rose briefly in January, but the broader contract market continues to favor shippers. In general, the for-hire trucking index shows that spot rates have slowly been improving since the fall, but capacity is still broadly available, and it appears private fleets are still adding capacity, which is keeping rates lower for the time being. Maintenance costs are on the decline. That's according to the Technology and Maintenance Council's latest report. It found that maintenance expenses fell 1.4% in the fourth quarter of 2023, driven by a 2.2% decline in the cost of parts. 2023 was an up and down year for maintenance costs. They were down on the Technology and Maintenance Council's report in the second quarter, up in the third, and back down in the fourth. Compared to 2022, maintenance costs were up 0.2% last year, while the cost of parts dropped 2.2% year over year. Labor expenses spiked 4%. The report concludes that the recent decreases suggest that inflationary pressures are easing up a bit as supply chains normalize. Today marks 15 years since the tragic death of Jason Rivenberg, the truck driver who was killed in an armed robbery in South Carolina after he couldn't find a safe place to park. To honor Rivenberg and to make sure every trucker has a safe place to park their truck, Jason's Law was passed in 2012 as part of a highway reauthorization bill. It requires periodic reports that lay out the truck parking situation in the U.S. and the progress that has been made, but it has been a while. The most recent Jason's Law report was released in 2020. More than 11,000 truck drivers took part in that survey, and 98% of them reported problems finding safe parking. Issues with truck parking were reported in every state and every region. One avenue for addressing the shortage lies within Congress. The Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act would allocate $755 million over 3 years to the construction of free publicly available truck parking. The House version currently has 46 co-sponsors. The Senate bill has 14. To put some pressure on your elected representatives, check out fightingfortruckers.com and remind them about what happened to Jason Rivenberg so it doesn't happen to anybody else. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has opened the application period for more than $180 million in grants to promote roadway safety. The grants are open to state, territorial, and tribal organizations, along with local jurisdictions, academic institutions, and training programs. There are 5 distinct grant programs through which money is available. One centers around technology, another prioritizes public awareness and education campaigns, while another is aimed at getting current and former members of the U.S. Armed Services into trucking jobs. Applications are due by April 19th. The California Air Resources Board has reached a $16 million settlement agreement with a Japan-based manufacturer over emission violations. Yanmar Power Technology of Osaka was hit with 3 violations involving close to 20,000 engines, primarily used in transportation refrigeration units. CARB says Yanmar did not follow reporting, testing, or production guidelines that are required to sell such engines in their state. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association has issued a call to action for its Illinois members. It's over a bill in the State House there that would require Illinois to adopt California emission standards and eliminate the sale of fuel-powered cars and trucks by 2035. The bill also specifies that Illinois has to adopt California's Zero-Emission Vehicle Program, Low-Emission Vehicle Program, Advanced Clean Trucks Program, and Heavy-Duty Low Nitrogen Oxide Program. OOIDA said the regulations HB 1634 seeks to put into effect are burdensome, short-sighted, difficult to implement, and will drive up costs for small business truckers. Illinois truckers are encouraged to visit the fightingfortruckers.com website and tell their state reps why they should oppose this piece of legislation. Transportation officials in Southern California are turning to technology to tamp down on congestion on Interstate 15. KABC reports that Riverside County has its sights set on the stretch of I-15 that runs through Temecula. It's constantly gridlocked. The plan to open things up involves integrated technology or a so-called smart freeway. 3 northbound on-ramps will have their signals synced up with sensors that analyze the speed and flow of traffic. When traffic does slow down, the ramps will adjust and release an appropriate number of cars onto the freeway to keep things moving a bit more freely. There will also be signals on at least one on-ramp alerting drivers to when they're allowed to use a shoulder for travel. Construction is set to begin this summer. And finally, it's been a while since we've had an acquisition report on, but today we have one. Marine drayage provider IMC Logistics says it's acquired drayage company American Pacific Transportation. Terms of the deal were not announced. The acquisition expands IMC's footprint on the West Coast. The company says the merger brings its total of trucks in California to more than 500. And that is Landline Now News for today. Scott Thompson reporting.
Thanks, Scott. Next, I'll discuss drivers being stranded by their carriers with Joe Biggs and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Business Services Department. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to Prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Loadboard Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Loadboard Pro.
Buckling up keeps everyone safe on the roads. Learn more at www.sharetheroadsafely.gov. Paid for by FMCSA.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Every day, truckers call OOIDA with problems they're encountering out on the road, looking for advice on how to handle those situations. And many of those truckers end up talking with OOIDA's Business Services Department. Here to discuss some recent problems and what the possible solutions are Aaron Lynch and Joe Biggs of Business Services. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Thank you as always, Mark.
Thanks for having us on, Mark.
The first situation we've got here is drivers, when they're being terminated from their driving positions, are being stranded where they are. What have we heard from drivers? Can you tell us about any specific cases or stories of this happening?
Yeah, so most commonly it involves when you're in a lease purchase and you're either living in that truck itself or, you're paying on that truck and you don't make all the payments because they're starving you out and you can't get by as far as that goes. I had one guy call up here the other day. He was in the shower and he had gotten the truck taken from the lot while he was in the shower. Luckily, he had a change of clothes. But not much else. His cell phone, all of his personal belongings, wallet, and stuff like that were in the truck itself. So he had to go to the Flying J and actually make a phone call from there to try to see what was going on. He didn't even know that it was being taken. But that's just one of the things that happen, as far as that goes when you get involved in that. And it's not just prohibited to lease purchases. It's just in general when you're being terminated from a contract. They don't have to have you, they don't have to bring you back to the terminal. They don't have to find you a way home. A lot of them will send you an airplane ticket or whatnot to go there, but not when you're coming back.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not just necessarily being stranded. I mean, they do a number of distasteful things. I had a guy call and I was talking to him. They got him a bus ticket back, but the bus wouldn't allow him to bring on his personal effects. He had his fridge and stuff like that, and then some sentimental value stuff. He went home. He started getting in contact with them. Hey, when can I get my stuff? Can you send it to me? Like, what's the situation there? Oh, we don't have that stuff. We don't know where that went. We didn't think it was ever even here. I mean, you're talking a good number of stuff, items that he had that now are gone. So, I mean, they can leave you stranded to where you got to figure out how to get home. And maybe you don't have money because, like he said, they starved you out. Or they send you on your way, say, yeah, we'll give you your stuff later, and then you never get it back.
So what advice can we offer people if you're in this situation? What can people do once they find themselves stranded somewhere?
So usually in most cases, when the writing's on the wall when it's going to happen. It's not usually a surprise, maybe at that time in that time frame, but you can see it coming weeks in advance or at least days in advance. So to be able to prepare for it, you want to have some money set to the side so that you have the ability to be able to find your own way back on your own accord. As far as personal belongings, you want to keep that to a minimum. Now, it's different if you live in the truck itself, but you're not going to be able to take, like Joe was saying, a microwave or a little mini fridge or something like that on a bus. It's even worse if you have, a pet, like a dog. You want to make arrangements so you always have something. If you plan on quitting yourself, you always want to make sure that you have the fuel to get where you need to go to be able to turn that back into the terminal, because a lot of times carriers will turn that fuel card off. That way you are stuck on the side of the road. And then all of a sudden you're looking at a truck abandonment because you have nowhere to go. So that's also a tactic that's been utilized that's not talked about enough, in my opinion. Making sure you have the resources or family or friends to be able to get your way back home is pretty necessary.
One of the things that I noticed in there you talked about is lease purchase, and I know that lease purchases are something that we strongly advise against in most cases. Is there anything you can do in terms of the lease purchase to avoid having this happen, or is that just something that's you're not able to alleviate?
Honestly, no. There's not a whole lot you can do because, like he said, most of the times you'll understand that that's what's going to happen. But there are instances where you're just running along. They say, "Yeah, just come back to the shop. We got to do some stuff," and then you're on your own. And I mean, there's not going to be anything in that lease agreement that gives you any alleviation from the issue. I mean, they're not going to say, "Okay, well, if we terminate you, we'll get you back home." Yada yada. That's not going to be in there. So at that point, I mean, there's not really much you can do.
Just avoid the lease purchase in the first place.
I would agree with that.
Okay. Let's go on to another topic here, and that is scam text messages. What sort of text scams are going on right now? Can you give us some examples?
One big one that I've been getting a lot of phone calls about are that reasonable suspicion training. And that's basically for a carrier that has multiple employees to be able to watch a video or whatnot. It's not necessarily, we call them scam text messages. It's not necessarily a scam. It's real. It's a real thing, but it doesn't apply to everyone. And sometimes these places are sending you links or sending you a website or whatnot to be able to go purchase it through them. And a lot of times it's either free or it may be $10 and they're charging $200. That's kind of where the scam or the solicitation comes in.
A reasonable suspicion, that deals with drug testing, right?
Correct. And just like CMCI, as part of OOIDA, we do that here, So you don't necessarily need to go outside of the metrics to get that.
Okay. Are there other scams going on right now by text message that you guys are aware of?
Typically, it's just about things like he said that are coming up. DMCS 150 update, that's a big one. They don't really look to see if you've done it. They just know that your DOT number, based off the numbers that it's up and coming. Towards the end of the year, you'll see UCR, stuff like that. Like you said, it's legitimate stuff, but they're either trying to charge you way too much or maybe it's not even the correct time for you to do it. But as far as any other type of scams, no, it's typically stuff like that.
How are they getting the phone numbers? Do we know?
It's public information. It's on Safer.
Okay. So there's nothing you can do in terms of that to get your phone number to where they can't get at it.
Well, and that's how they get your mailing address, too, because whatever address is on there, it's either you're going to be your house or your business address. It's on there as well, so you get it by mail. The only way they don't necessarily get it, they can even get your email to a certain degree if they have some of the methodology correct and down. That's a little bit harder, but yeah, they can get your information. It's all public online.
And the FMCSA, it's worth putting out there, will not text you for this stuff. Typically, it'll be mail. They will email on occasion, depending on what it is, but they will not text you asking you to update this stuff.
Yeah, FMCSA or DOT don't text.
How do you spot these scams that are kind of not scams so that you don't get taken in?
Typically, like a text, like we said, they're not going to text you. If you do get like a letter or an email, somewhere on there, it probably will say in the small print that we are not actually affiliated with the Department of Transportation, something of that sort. And if you have any, concerns or hesitations, just give us a shout in the Compliance Center. We'll discuss it with you and let you know if it's legitimate or not.
Yeah, or we'll put our heads together, and if we don't know the answer right away when you call, we'll hang up and we'll call you back the same day, and we'll put all of our heads together and figure out one way or another if it's truly legitimate or not, even if we have to make the phone call or try to reach out on your behalf.
And folks, if you do need to do that, the phone number is 816-229-5791. Again, 816-229-5791. Guys, let's go on to one other topic here, and that is pulling your MVR or motor vehicle record. Who do you contact? What is your first step here?
So to pull your MVR, you can do it a few different ways, right? So you can go down to the DMV and pull your motor vehicle record. It's a small fee, it's a one-time fee, and it's basically just an abstract record of your driving record. You can also, in some states, not all, but some states, do it online. You can literally type in Google, get MVR Florida, get MVR Arkansas, things of that nature, and they will pull up, and you can do it online. There's still a fee associated with that, too. We also do it in the Compliance Connections program that we offer here. You can call us up, and we can get you over there. They pull it for a fee as well. That's just a few things that you can do to try to do that. And you got to do it on a yearly basis. Keep in mind, this is a requirement to keep in your actual driver file for every driver. You have to pull one on each driver once a year.
Even if you're the driver and the owner.
Correct.
That's one of the key things there is a lot of these things when you're your own carrier, you've got to pull it on yourself as if you're an employee.
Correct. You have to treat yourself like you're hiring yourself. And a lot of people don't understand that or it doesn't make sense. But that is the way to go.
Who else may be looking at your MVR? I mean, who else is trying to get access to that or can get access to that, and how can it affect you?
Typically, the only people who can get it without your consent would be insurance companies. They'd be the ones looking at it to determine your liability. Brokers and people of that nature, they're not going to be able to get that unless you voluntarily hand it over. That's not typically public access. You have to be a certain group or yourself as the individual who can pull that information.
What sort of information is in there? I mean, you mentioned a little bit there, Aaron, but I'm wondering if you can go into a little bit more detail on what kind of information is in your MVR.
So an MVR is available in each state, right? And it's going to be a record of your violations or past history. And it's going to be a record of any crash that you've had in the last few years as well. Depends on how far you pull it back, if you do a 3-year, 5-year, or a 10-year. So it's basically crashes and violations.
Okay. Let's go on to one last topic here, and that is brokers who are charging exorbitant amounts in late fees for loads. What are we hearing from drivers? I mean, what are they saying about this?
That they're trying to nickel and dime them. They feel like anytime they make the wrong move, there's a huge fee associated with it. I spoke to a guy probably a month or two ago. He got to the receiver. He was 15 minutes early and was told to go back around to the end of the line. Well, at that point he was late and he got hit with like a $250 late fee. It's just things to charge the carrier or the driver even more. And they try to use it as to keep you on time and all that and keep everything flowing. But sometimes it seems a little predatory.
Is this the shippers or the brokers that are doing this?
This is strictly the brokers. In most of the cases that I've looked into in depth, they'll blame it on the shippers. But then when you ask for proof that there was some kind of fee associated with that, they're unable to provide it, or they're just flat out refuse. Some of them that I've called personally. So I can't for certain say it's just the brokers, but I'm pretty confident in saying that it has nothing to do with the shippers. That, like Joe said, they're even in more instances, it's more than just nickel and diming. In the contract, it'll say we'll charge you $150 for being late, right? But then there's a $600 fee when you get charged, and then when you call that broker, you try to explain the situation, and you've been in communication this whole time. Well, why is it $600? Well, the shipper told us. Well, where's the proof of that? Well, we don't have to show you.
Right. And the agreement, you'll typically sign your rights away to see any documentation validating whatever claims they want to make.
And there's the thing is, you've got to read the contract. This is something that's typically in the contract.
Typically, yes. Now, there are times where it's not in there, but more than likely it's going to be in there saying there's going to be fees for this, that, and the other. And you definitely want to read that contract. You need to know what you're agreeing to and what you're agreeing to give away, essentially, as far as, what protects you as the carrier.
In terms of avoiding situations like this or avoiding these kind of late fees, is there anything besides just making sure that it's not in the contract? Is there anything you can do to help alleviate the situation?
Check credit scores. Work with brokers that you know that you've done business with before.
Okay. Well, guys, we ran out of time, but I want to thank you very much for the information on all this stuff.
I appreciate you having us on, Mark.
As always, thanks.
I've been talking with Joe Biggs and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Business Services Department. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget misaccuracy when you truck on a CAT scale.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. Like tires, fuel, and an engine, insurance is one of those things you just have to have for your truck. But not all insurance is created equal. Ashley Blackford is here with the experts from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to answer some questions.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby with OOIDA's Insurance Department. How are you doing today, ladies?
Fantastic.
Hi, great. How are you?
I am wonderful. Even
Good.
better now that you are here.
Aw.
Today we are talking...
I've actually heard that before.
Yes, I know. Today we are talking about pausing truck insurance. First off, why would someone want to pause their coverage?
I would typically say because their truck's broke down and in the shop, or it's parked for the winter, kind of seasonal type work.
Yeah, a lot of times we hear because business is slow. But honestly, we actually have a lot of drivers, too, that go out of town often, sometimes for a couple months at a time. You know, they're going on vacation or doing something of that nature. And, of course, they don't want to pay premium, while the truck's not making money. So
kind of whatever the reason, it kind of comes down to wanting to save money, I assume.
Yes, always.
Is it possible to pause insurance?
I would say no. I mean, I don't know if there's any other insurance company out there that maybe offers something like that. But the bottom line is pausing it and not canceling it means that there's still technically coverage in place for no premium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And companies aren't going to take that risk.
No, they're not willing to take the risk of still basically insuring the truck, especially when there are things like filings involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had talked about that off the air with primary liability. I mean, you're still looking at usually $1 million risk, at least $750,000. And say someone forgets to call and tell you that the truck's back on the road, you still have a huge, huge risk.
What are some things to keep in mind if you do decide to go ahead and cancel your policy? If you, like you said, you're away for a couple of months, your truck's in the shop, you want to save that, whatever few months of paying, what are some things to keep in mind?
I think typically the agent's probably going to say, we can't pause your coverage. We can cancel it and then rewrite it. Look at rewriting it when you're ready to get back on the road. But as far as cautions when canceling and rewriting coverage, I'd say one of the biggest ones comes down to discounts. Do you have any kind of longevity discounts? Have you been put in a certain tier? Diamond tier for your longevity? Because if so, when you rewrite that coverage, you're rewriting at the new rates. And so in the long run, a lot of times that's not really going to save you money because you might have been better off to pay for insurance for those 2 months rather than, rewriting at the larger rate.
Something you can look at doing, though, is removing excess coverage. And again, if you have your own authority and you have primary liability, it's usually going to be the most expensive part of your coverage. And you cannot cancel that because you can. You can't pause it, though, because if you cancel it, then it cancels the filings on your authority. And that's a reason a lot of people want to try to keep it active is so that their authority doesn't go inactive. So we have had the conversation with folks about removing coverages, what do you have that you don't need while the equipment's parked? And sometimes we can look at it from that aspect and just remove anything excess.
Do brokers and shippers ever look at, how long you've had insurance, or is that ever looked at and, kind of judged if it looks like you only have had it for a month or two?
More and more, that's something that they're looking at. Or, if you have a history of canceling that authority. Now, if you've built a relationship with a shipper or broker and you only work for one of them and you work seasonally, clearly you know what's allowed and not allowed, and they know that your history. But a lot of times, when you're dealing with new shippers and brokers, they're looking at that authority history. So if you're canceling that coverage every 6 months for 6 months, that might be something that they choose not to load or work with you. So that's definitely something to consider when looking at new shippers and brokers.
Right.
And you said, you could have certain discounts put on that maybe you don't know about. How important is it to ask about those before you decide to cancel? Because like you said, saving 2 months or 6 months might not actually be saving you in the long run.
I would honestly hope that the agent would just discuss that with you without you having to ask. Here are the downsides to canceling your coverage. But if that's not something that comes up in conversation, I would definitely say, if I rewrite, am I going to be able to keep that loss-free discount or, whatever you're aware of that exists on there?
Yeah, and going back to what Trista said earlier, especially if you have longevity. Because when insurance companies are renewing a policy, I think almost anywhere you're at, there is going to be a benefit to staying with the same insurance company for a long time. So if you've had a policy for 10 years and you haven't had claims or anything like that, the underwriters at renewal time are probably going to look at ways to keep your premium from going up maybe as much as like a new policy would, especially with discounts, loss-free. But sometimes there's, hey, you've been with us for 7 years, and they'll add a little bit more of a credit or discount. I can't say every single place does it, but I think a lot of them do. I mean, I've seen it on my personal auto insurance.
Yeah.
If someone is in a tight situation and they're looking for ways to save, do you have any tips on how they can do that?
Sometimes we look at, like I was saying, excess coverage. So one thing that we really try to look at is we've seen a lot of people pay off their note on the equipment and forget to take off the gap coverage. And honestly, gap coverage isn't that expensive. It's not going to be, the make it or break it premium. And hopefully the agent realizes that needs to come off. But there's certain things like that where you definitely want to take a look at what you have and kind of reevaluate. Every year, honestly, at renewal, look at your paperwork and see what's on there that you may not need.
And as far as gap coverage is concerned, you don't necessarily have to wait until, in most cases, depending on the insurance company, but you don't have to necessarily wait until your truck is paid off to delete that gap coverage. If you know you owe $20,000 on your truck and it's worth $50,000 easily right now, that coverage isn't doing you any good anyway.
Right.
So, that's a good time for you to consider. I mean, your agent doesn't know how much you owe, how long the loan was, that sort of thing. So it's a good time for you to consider when you get that renewal, what coverages do you have? Are there things there that can be deleted? Are there limits that can be lowered to help you out in those times of financial struggle or when you're going to pause your insurance? Can you lower your limit to $750? During that time, because we've talked about before, most shippers and brokers are going to require $1 million coverage. But maybe while you're parked, you could lower that coverage to the minimum just to keep the authority active.
Right. Well, and cargo insurance is always a big one we look at, too, if you're parked. I mean, I definitely don't recommend doing anything with the cargo coverage while you're running. And there's a couple of states that need a cargo filing, but for the most part, not. FMCSA doesn't require it. I think they used to, right?
Yeah, there were cases back in the days of common and contract authority.
Yes, but they don't require that anymore. And like I said, there's a couple of states that do, but for the most part, it's definitely something to ask your agent about because that can easily be removed while you're parked. And then the big thing, though, is to make sure you get it re-added. Make sure when you get back on the road that you make sufficient changes so that you're covered properly. Because no one wants to see an incident happen where you forgot to re-add the cargo or up your liability back up to $1 million or whatever the case may be.
Or re-add your supplemental tow, those sort of things.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned this about, when you call your agent, hopefully they would suggest like the gap insurance. How important is it to maybe go into that conversation? Because not every agent is well-versed in trucking. Unlike you fine ladies.
Thank you.
How important is it to kind of have that information in front of you or know what questions to ask maybe just in case that they don't suggest those things?
I think a lot of that is going to depend on your agent. So in the long run, it's really, it really does fall back on you to kind of educate yourself on your policy and your coverages. You should know those up front. A lot of times you're getting sent an annual application to sign and return. look that over. 1 to 2 pages, make sure your equipment's correct, make sure your drivers are correct, and make sure the coverages that you want are correct and that you actually know what they are. Call your agent and ask if you don't know what they are and be really up to date and educated.
I hope this doesn't sound faux pas. It's not really fun to learn all these things about insurance. I've had fun in my job, but I'm on a different side of the phone.
Right.
It is really important, though, because there's so many things that the agent could potentially miss. And hopefully not. Hopefully you're dealing with someone who's tenured and can really guide you on that process. But that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes you might be dealing with someone who's a little newer and hasn't learned all of these steps yet. Another thing I would recommend keeping an eye on, going back to what Trista was saying with like the renewal paperwork and such, a lot of companies offer stated value physical damage policies. And if you are on a stated value policy, there's a good chance that you may need to lower the coverage. There's usually a good chance, too, that you might need to increase it. That's kind of the hard thing with stated limit policies is making sure you have an accurate amount. The market fluctuates so much that it's hard to keep up with the current market value of the equipment. But we have seen folks who were paying on $120,000 coverage because that's what the truck cost 5 years ago.
Back when they first got it,
right.
yeah.
And then they've never lowered it.
How often can you look at the stated value policy and change it? Or how often should you?
I think that's going to depend on the agent, but a good rule of thumb is annually when that policy is renewing.
Okay. I also wanted to ask, what if you have a loan? How can, not pausing, but stopping your insurance and then starting it back up, how can that affect it?
Hopefully, whenever you call, if you call to either cancel your coverage or mention the pause, and the agent is looking into your policy and you have a lien holder on your truck, they're asking you, and that's typically what we would do, see that, you've had this lien holder for 2 or 3 years, because if there is a loan on the truck, they get proof of cancellation. And they could force coverage on your truck back to the date of the cancel. A lot of times it doesn't catch up with that lien holder for 2 or 3 months. And then all of a sudden you owe 2 or 3 months of much higher rates than you were paying originally.
And usually the coverage isn't that good. Another thing to consider, too, is that even if the loan is paid off, a lot of times we still don't recommend, I say a lot of times, all the time. We still recommend keeping the physical damage in place because while the equipment is parked, there still could be a catastrophe. So there might be a tornado or, some sort of natural weather event, theft.
Or even, theft, vandalism, the kinds of things that can happen to your truck when it's parked. And even if there's not a loan on the truck, you still have an investment, and the best way to take care of that investment is make sure you're covered for it. I'll use $20,000 because we've talked about $120,000, but most people can't take a $20,000 hit to replace that truck themselves.
Well, and you have to keep in mind the market as well. When the market's up, that equipment is usually worth more. And, especially depending on the year and make, sometimes it's worth a lot more than you would actually think. So we always want to make sure that the physical damage is in place.
All right. Ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Our thanks to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. If you have any questions about insurance, you can call 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. We'll be back after this.
Capital Reman, your leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Let us help you avoid costly downtime and repairs by visiting capitalreman.com today. Use code OOIDA10 to receive your member benefits.
Stock up on Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's most trusted anti-gel. And to be safe from the harshest winter conditions, make sure you have Howe's Diesel Lifeline on hand, the fastest-acting gelling rescue product. Available nationwide, Howe's products are designed to keep you rolling through the toughest conditions. Visit howesproducts.com.
Attention professional drivers, are you behind on your tax filings? You owe money? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. You watch the road, we'll keep an eye on the IRS. Call now. 855-976-4291.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
One state is pushing back against nuclear verdicts, while several others are mulling over changes to left lane rules. Welcome back to Landline Now and our weekly state legislative update. As we say, welcome to our resident state legislative expert, Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine. Keith, good to see you.
Scott, you're looking well. I see you're ready for football season already.
Yeah, it's right around the corner, right?
Well, and technically, it never really ends, I don't think.
It doesn't, does it? We do have the arena, or the UFL, or some other new league is coming up. But anyway,
something.
We digress. We're going to start in Wisconsin here, not talking about football or the Packers. We're going to be talking about nuclear verdicts here for a moment. Wisconsin state lawmakers have moved ahead with changes to truck insurance in the state. It's now on the governor's desk for signature. So as we wait, let's look at what this bill would do if signed into law, Keith.
Yeah, and it is worth pointing out, as we're covering and we're talking about legislation throughout the course of the year, there are a few times where legislation gets fast-tracked. A lot of times we see something getting fast-tracked, like in the last week of a session.
Yeah.
In this particular case with Wisconsin, they are getting towards the end of their session, I guess, but they're not there yet. And this particular effort to address concerns about nuclear verdicts came up for a Senate floor vote. And after it had kind of gone through the process normally there in the Senate approved it by about a 2-1 margin. And then it went over to the Assembly, and it just got through that same day. That same day, it just completely went through the Assembly and onto the governor's desk, which is just a rarity. But yeah, specifically on the topic of these nuclear verdicts, the legislation is looking to limit the total amount of non-economic damages like pain and suffering, but to limit those amounts that a person can recover from a trucking company. It would put in place a $1 million cap on those non-economic damages. Whenever you've got an incident that involves a truck, if there is an injury, death, or some other loss, those all would be covered in this, really what it would, again, an attempt to do away with, if at all possible, these nuclear verdicts.
Yeah, we've seen other states tackle this issue as well, and the one that we recently talked about, it's not coming to mind right now, but it is refreshing to see states like Wisconsin take up this issue. We've, of course, got OOIDA, Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association, expressing support for this bill, for this effort. But it is something that it seems like more lawmakers are taking notice of, is this issue of nuclear verdicts and the effect that it does have on small business truckers.
Yeah, we've talked about this issue in multiple states. It is an emerging trend across the country that we really maybe didn't see a lot of here within a handful of years ago. But last year we started to see some movement in that direction of states where lawmakers are looking to address it through legislation. This Wisconsin bill getting through the state house again in very timely fashion, like I mentioned, it is a good sign that, really, whenever you've got an issue that might be trending or starting to pick up as being a trend where states are trying to address it, if you can have one state get a foothold and actually make a change so that maybe neighboring states or states in that region, they can look to their neighbor to see what they've done, it can help make something a little bit more expansive and being addressed. But yeah, you've got lawmakers in Wisconsin. What helped the legislation get to the point where it is to the governor's desk, you've got lawmakers in both the House and the Senate, at least who spoke recently on the bill. You can tell they're well versed on the issue and in communicating that, and really saying a lot of the same things that like the Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association would be saying, or of course OIDA on the topic, and it's helped to get it to this point, at least in the state of Wisconsin.
Any hint as to what Governor Tony Evers might do here? Because we should mention it does obviously need to be signed into law for it to go into effect. Do we have any hint as to what he may be thinking?
Well,
have you talked to him?
There's enough concern or uncertainty on what the decision might be. OIDA, they issued a call to action on this, encouraging Wisconsin members to contact the governor to ask that he do sign it into law. This is SB 613. But I would say you would tend to believe that the governor would see it pretty favorably whenever you've got one chamber of the state house get it through in less than 24 hours, and that was on the heels of another chamber approving it by about 2-1 margin. But that's not always a guarantee that a governor is going to get on board with that. So definitely does not hurt to have Wisconsin members voicing their support for this legislation with the governor's office.
We'll see what happens. We know you'll keep us updated on that one. And the UFL does begin at the end of March, Keith. No Wisconsin team, unfortunately. But football season, as you said, never truly ends.
Not yet, Wisconsin.
Let's move on to our next topic here, left lane laws. We've talked about this a lot, it seems like, in recent months. A hot topic these days. We've got more states looking at this issue. 3 states in particular looking at provisions solely for trucks. We're talking Colorado, Kentucky, and Michigan. What can you tell us?
Yeah, of course, the left lane use overall for trucks and other vehicles, you want states to have rules in place that the left lane is for passing only. And there is legislation around the country that focuses on that. A left lane use for all vehicles, staying out of the left lane, not just camping out over there. And then there are other states with legislation that focuses solely on keeping trucks from the left lane. And we've got multiple states so far as we're getting closer to spring that have legislation to do that, limit trucks, or to further maybe expand on their truck lane restrictions. In Colorado, trucks already are prohibited from traveling in the left lane in a specific area around I-70, Glenwood Canyon. I know that area is specifically addressed in statute, but there is legislation that has multiple truck-related provisions in it, one of which is a truck lane restriction on I-70, about a 150-mile stretch from Glenwood Springs to Morrison would say trucks just can't be out in the left lane when they're traveling on that stretch. This is a bill that has a hearing this week in the Senate Transportation Committee there in Colorado. So maybe we'll get some clarity on the possibilities of this legislation, whether or not it'll move forward.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on that. We know you'll keep us updated there. 2 more states to look at real quick here, Keith. We've got about a minute left, but we're looking at Kentucky and Michigan also looking at this issue.
Yeah, in Kentucky, the House has actually unanimously approved legislation that includes a provision that would single out trucks from traveling in the far left lane on roadways that have at least 3 lanes traveling in the same direction. Would take the extra step of prohibiting trucks from left lane travel. There would be, the obvious exceptions if you're entering or leaving a highway that requires you to be over in the left lane, or that sort of thing. But yeah, again, you got another state that's looking to do more. Probably would be fair to say probably do more than they really need to on this issue. And is it even though it's well intended, not going to accomplish the safety benefits that they're going for.
Updates at landline.media, and if you click on this story in particular that Keith wrote, you can read a quote in which somebody says, "It just kills my goats that I have to drive 50 miles per hour in the slow lane. A great quote there. Keith, a pleasure as always. We appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for having me.
Our thanks once again to Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine for his time, and our thanks to you for yours. We appreciate you tuning in and hope to see you again soon. In the meantime, take care and drive safe.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.